For my senior project, I used acoustics to characterize substrate at the bottom of the ocean in the eastern Chukchi Sea of Alaska. So when I came to COA, I knew that I wanted to study marine science. I volunteered and eventually interned with Allied Whale, and I spent time out on Mount Desert Rock, which is one of the college's offshore research islands. And I was first introduced to acoustics my second year as a student. I was helping a graduate student with their thesis work, which involved the detection of right whale upcalls in the Gulf of Maine. And my third year, I spent a semester in Alaska as part of the college's EcoLeague exchange program. So there I continued my studies in marine science, but with a focus on polar systems, and I became really fascinated with polar marine ecology. And this senior project was born out of an internship that I did last summer at the University of Washington as part of the Joint Institute for the Study of Atmosphere and Ocean. And there I worked in the Fisheries Acoustics and Research Lab, where I learned about the role of acoustics in seafloor mapping. So acoustics is a type of active sonar where a pulse of sound is transmitted from the bottom of a boat, and this pulse of sound travels through the water column, it hits the seafloor, and it's then returned back to the same transducer that it was emitted from. And when this is done across a line or a transect, as you see here on the picture to the right, you can get an image of what the seafloor looks like. And all these little dots above the seafloor are actually fish, so we can use this technology to look at fish density as well. But I was interested in using this technology for a different purpose, which is to actually look at the acoustic return signal and determine what type of sediment is below the ocean. So this really excited me, and I wanted to continue my work after I left my internship at the University of Washington. So my project goals were really twofold. The first was to use this technology to characterize the substrate in the eastern Chukchi Sea. And the second was to compare my acoustic data to physical samples. So I was really interested in seeing, is this method actually a proper way to look at the substrate? So the physical samples were actually taken from the bottom of the ocean with a coring device, and those were used to sort of ground truth my project to see if the results were accurate. So a little bit of background about the Chukchi. It's located off the north coast of Alaska, and it's considered to be one of the most productive marine ecosystems in the world. It has a vast and shallow sea that's pristine habitat for a lot of ground fish and mollusks, and this in turn fuels a lot of the more iconic Arctic species that you may think about, such as polar bears and walrus and a bunch of seals and a variety of seabirds. But despite its importance, there's not a lot of information known about this particular region because it is so remotely located, and it's covered in ice for a large portion of the year, so it's really hard to get to, and there's a huge data gap there. This is a map of my study area. So this data was all collected in 2013 as part of a separate NOAA study. So I was analyzing data that had already been collected. And as you can see, my transects extend from Wainwright to Barrow, Alaska. So each one of these black lines represents an individual transect where the boat would travel across and send out these acoustic signals and collect the return data. And my transects also extended across a portion of the Barrow Canyon, which is a large submarine canyon right off the coast of Barrow. And this is a map of one of my results that I did in GIS. So this is looking at bottom hardness across transects. So the darker red color that you see is representative of a harder bottom. So as you can see, the inshore region is significantly harder than the offshore region. And this result is likely due to an effect of ice gouging. So in the winter months, huge amounts of pack ice will form off the coast of Barrow, and they'll move their way inshore, and the ice keels will come down and they'll scrape away all of the sediment there, and it's just basically leaving bare bedrock. So that's why we're getting a harder acoustic signal on the inshore region. And then in terms of answering my second question, is the acoustic method an actual proper way to validate this sediment here? The lines represent my acoustic data again, but the triangles represent the physical samples that I mentioned where there was actually a collection of samples from the seafloor. And the good news is that my acoustics results were validated by the physical samples. So both of these methods did pick up on similar transitions across the Chukchi. And both methods also picked up on this transition zone here that's highlighted in red. And that's likely due to a current that comes across here, and it's depositing different sediment in this particular canyon. So in conclusion, I found that acoustics is an effective way to characterize the bottom sediment. It's a lot more thorough than looking at physical samples that are isolated patches in the ocean. It's a lot less disruptive as well, and it's definitely more time efficient and more cost effective in terms of looking at the seafloor. And this study validated other theories about what this region looks like, but it was the first one to really give a thorough, in-depth detail about what the ocean looks like there. And my study did conclude with trends that were similar of depth and bathymetric features in terms of sediment type, and it provided new insight overall into the physical characteristics of the Chukchi. And in terms of implications, understanding the physical region of an area is a really important part of understanding the whole ecosystem and provides a lot of information to determine about the abundance and distribution of the biomass of the biota in the region. So the researchers that I was working with at NOAA are actually taking my physical sediment sample data, and they're looking at biological communities. So they're going to be looking at what fish are associated with different types of sediment. So this study will be continued with researchers there at NOAA. And the Arctic is rapidly changing, and as I mentioned before, there's a lot of data gaps in this region, so there's a real need for technology and tools that can rapidly and accurately assess these environmental conditions. Oil drilling is a huge threat to this region. There's a real possibility that it will happen in the next few years. There's been a lot of interest in drilling in this region with a lot of pushback. So in the next few years, it's very possible that there will be drilling there. So again, it's important to have this technology that can provide baseline data so we can look at the changes as they occur from anthropogenic activities. And in the next few days, I'll be leaving for Virginia. I have accepted a Batten Research Fellowship in sea turtle and marine mammal conservation, so I'll be continuing my studies in marine science, and in the fall, I'll be applying to graduate programs while I participate in a research apprenticeship program at the University of Washington. And with that, I'd like to thank these funding sources and all these people for their support. Thank you.
Yeah,